I'll leave the floor open for the introduction as soon as you're ready. I'm ready.
Okay, now we're official. As I jumped earlier, I said that our guest today is Matt D'Amours, the CBC journalist. Matt is a multimedia reporter with CBC Montreal. He produces videos, radio, and textual journalism. He first tried his hand at journalistic work in film school at Dawson around 2010, so he's a young man, and found himself drawn to documentary work in particular, and all the research and interviewing and editing that entails. During the student protests of 2012, with all the pot banging, he had his first experience with on-the-ground reporting and taking photos and capturing video of the nightly demonstrations in the streets of Montreal. In 2014, he enrolled at Concordia in the journalism program, where he became a regular contributor at The Link, which is the newspaper for Concordia. He started up a news podcast for their website called The Download, and he wrote for the paper regularly and helped flesh out its video content. During the anti-austerity demonstrations in 2015, he got into live streaming and managed to develop an audience there. Mainstream media outlets took notice, and he was invited to appear on several news programs on television, radio, and the web to share his reporting. In the fall of 2016, he took on a news internship at CBC Montreal, and during that time, he was able to help several reporters develop stories through research and pre-interviews. In addition, he was given the freedom and time to develop his own story ideas and wrote several articles for the web. Having pitched an idea for a report on the future of self-driving technology in Quebec, he was also given the opportunity to develop and produce his own television report, which aired on CBC's 6 o'clock newscast. And this experience eventually led him to being hired as an on-call reporter in the CBC Montreal newsroom. Congratulations, Matt. We hear you're soon to be a father. Either that, yes. Or a very small bed that you've got behind you. Matt's topic today is the life of a reporter covering an election campaign. The floor is yours, sir.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jim. I appreciate the introduction. Bear with me for a second here. I'm going to share my screen so that part of it is all set up. So that is shared, and I think I had to share sound. Okay, so we'll see in a moment if sharing the sound also works here. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure to be able to be here and to talk to you folks today about covering an election, and also generally what it means to be a reporter at CBC, but really just in the field these days. And that leads us to this first board here that you're seeing. What does that mean? What does it mean these days to be a reporter covering whatever topic might come up on a daily basis? I just wanted to mention at the beginning in the introduction, I think there were 4 values that were mentioned, and I took note of them, and 3 of them jumped out at me, which is asking, is it the truth? Is it fair to all those involved? Those 2 are fundamental to the practice of journalism, and it's a question that we ask ourselves every single day. Not only when we're trying to decide what we should cover, but when we try to hash out exactly how we cover a given topic. Are we striving for the truth, and is it fair to all those involved? And the third one that came to mind is it fun? Hopefully it is, but there's never a guarantee that you're going to have fun in this job. Sometimes you get lucky and you do walk away from a story thinking, I had fun today, in addition to checking all those other boxes. But of course, sometimes we cover tragedy. There's no other way to label it. We deal with tragic situations, and sometimes we speak to people on the absolute worst day of their lives. But there's a balance that you have to strike professionally of trying to have a little bit of fun when you can. So getting back to the question of what does it mean these days to be, I think, Jim, you mentioned from that biography, a multimedia reporter. Well, it means a couple of things. It means very often having to be a political reporter, which we'll get into a little bit more talking about the campaign. More and more, it means being a climate change reporter, not in the abstract, but talking about the actual lived experiences and impacts of climate change, which I'm sure you all remember from 2017 and 2019 with the massive flooding that we saw in Quebec and elsewhere. Sometimes it means being a cultural reporter, and I think this falls into the having fun category, where you get to go to a place like Montreal Comic-Con and see something interesting and say, hey, maybe we could do something with that. And then you end up having a lightsaber duel with Darth Vader live on television, which that was one of the fun days, I would say. And then things took a turn with this nasty little pandemic that we had. Then all of a sudden we had to be health reporters, not only in terms of health science, but health policy, and how all those things intermingle with public policy, people's everyday lives, the economy, education. Everything was upended, and we as reporters had to adapt as well. This is a photo that was taken of an interview that I was doing with a city official. This was just before the lockdown, the first lockdown in the spring of 2020. And you could see that this is multimedia Matt D'Amours reporter at work here. And Sam has been on the other end of that camera as well. Very, very small mobile rig. And during the pandemic, we started using this kind of setup more and more, shooting our stories on iPhones instead of big bulky cameras, trying to be as flexible as possible, keeping our distance. And at the beginning, we didn't have the equipment necessarily to do what we ended up doing. So we were just improvising. And here I was using a microphone taped to a telescopic mop handle with some elastics. And that's the way that we had to make it work at the very beginning. And also when we were doing live reporting, sometimes it just made more sense to do it on the phone. And this is a photo that I took from my balcony. I was doing what we call a live hit from my balcony using a mobile setup. So we did that quite a bit during the pandemic. And then as things started to stabilize a bit more, I went back to the office, a lot of us did, and started being trying to be more independent and self-sufficient, using my own equipment. And you can see here a laptop and microphone and headphones. So that's basically a setup that I can report from the field, from pretty much anywhere where I still have an internet connection on my phone. So I'm able to do my interviews in the field and then edit a story, do my voiceover. So when you listen to a news story, you'll see images and you'll hear the reporter. That's because they've recorded their voice either in a sound booth at CBC or in the back of their car, because that's the most soundproof place in the location where they are. And I took all of those elements, and then the latest provincial campaign started. And the challenge there was, can I be that independent and self-sufficient while covering a provincial election campaign on a media bus following that campaign? And that is the experience that I'd like to show you a little bit about today. And I, as it turned out, ended up following the Québec solidaire campaign for 2 weeks out of the entire campaign. And I'd like to show you a couple of videos. The first one is pretty much what I would describe as the ideal scenario. And I call it the ideal scenario because this is a story that I was able to do during a week where I had gotten off the bus, but I was still covering the Québec solidaire campaign in large part. And this is a story that I had quite a bit of time to work on. And when I say quite a bit of time, I mean 1 week, whereas I'm used to doing a story and turning it around and getting it ready for broadcast within a day. Getting in at 9 o'clock in the morning and having a story ready for 6 o'clock. This was not that. I had time to play around and to be a little bit more creative. And this was the end result. And I'll show this to you so you get a sense of what the ideal scenario looks like. And then I'm going to show you the less than ideal scenario. So let me play this, and I'll mute myself in the meantime.
There's a lot to Québec solidaire's plan, from tramways and tram trains to more rapid bus service. But the thing that really catches the eye is the party's vision for the metro, including a new purple line. It's basically a reimagined version of Mayor Valérie Plante's pink line that would start downtown, pass through the Plateau, Rosemont, Montreal North, and RDP, all the way to Laval.
We need a bold vision to see where do we want to go in 2030, in 2035, 45, 50.
QS is also proposing to extend the Green Line further east from here, past Honoré-Beaugrand Station. And the Orange Line from Côte-Vertu Station going north all the way to Laval. In all, we're talking about more than 30 kilometers of new metro service. It's an ambitious plan, and we wanted to find out what the experts think.
It's important to be able to look at the data to back it up.
So I'll pause it there. It's a longer piece. It was about 3 minutes. And I say that that's a longer piece because usually at CBC Montreal, our newscast is half an hour. So typically our stories are between 1.5 to 2 minutes on the longer end. So when you do a 3-minute story, you're taking up more than 10% of the newscast. So you sort of have to think of it that way. But again, this was something that I had the time to plan out, and everything that you saw for the most part is stuff that I filmed myself. Even when I'm on camera, I'm what's called a video journalist. So usually I don't go out with a camera operator. I'm the person who is planning out a shoot and shooting the visuals themselves, making sure the sound is okay, framing and all that. And then I go back to the station and I edit the story myself. So when you have more time to play around with that idea, you can be very happy with the end result. So that was the ideal scenario. I'd like to show you, let me just make sure that I have, yeah. So I'd like to show you what the usual scenario looks like, especially once you get on a campaign bus. So this is a video that I did a version of this presentation last week to a journalism class at Concordia University. They'd asked me to come in and talk a little bit about the experience as well. So I shot this behind the scenes video on one of the days on this campaign bus. So I'll show you this video and then I'll talk a little bit more about it. And there are a couple of technical terms in the video that was geared more towards journalism students, but I think the two that I'll just explain now, I'll talk about a scrum. And a scrum generally is when a politician, usually a politician, will speak to the media, but he'll speak to all the media outlets at once, and the cameras and journalists will all sort of like form around the candidate or the politician, listen, ask questions, have them answered. So that's what a scrum would be. And you'll also hear me talking about a rant. And a rant is a type of story that we do for television where I am sort of giving you the basics of the story while on camera and then putting some clips of people in between. So those are the two kind of technical terms, but aside from that, I think that it'll give you a pretty good sense of what a usual day would look like on a campaign bus.
Hello from beautiful, sunny downtown Montreal. This is Matt D'Amours from CBC Montreal. It is Monday, exactly 1 week to the day until Election Day, and I am jumping back on the Québec Solidaire media bus. So I was on the bus for the first week of the campaign, took a break, and now I'm back for the last week, so I'm going to be following the campaign all along until election night. I'm about to jump on the media bus because we've got a news conference at 11 o'clock. I just want to give you a sense of just how much crap I have to bring with me to be able to cover a provincial campaign. All that. I have to lug that around everywhere. All right, so we are at the location of today's press conference. This is going to be the first event of the day. I'm going to walk inside and give you a sense of what it's like to cover one of these campaign announcements. Today we're going to be hearing about the youth vote in Quebec during the campaign. So the cameras have been set up. During this campaign, I have been a one-man show, which means that I'm not traveling with a camera operator. I am the camera operator, also the journalist, I'm also the sound engineer, I'm also the editor, which I'll show you that process a little bit later. So we've got the podium set up here. They have been kind enough to bring some spotlights, which is really going to help with lighting. All the cameras are set up right now, and this is mine. So this is what I shoot on. It's a little DSLR that really punches above its weight. I've got a shotgun mic on there to get background sound. And during the news conference, I'm going to be using this sucker, which is a Rode Wireless Go. So that is the receiver that is plugged into the camera. And then on the mixing board over here, everybody's microphones are plugged in here, including mine. So that is wirelessly going to transmit the audio to my camera over there. And as you can see, there's the full range of cameras here. We've got the medium-sized ones, we've got the big ones, and then we've got the Québec Solidaire social video here. They shoot in vertical. Shoot in vertical.
On n'a pas d'intention de donner de telles consignes de vote.
Okay.
Merci.
Bonjour.
Bonjour.
Oh, es-tu?
Attendez juste un instant. Je pense qu'on va...
On va prendre un petit moment.
Here we are at the back of the bus. The washroom. Put our clothes in there. Got the kitchen. And lunch today is dumplings. Hey everybody, so quick update, and this just goes to show how unpredictable and fast-paced a campaign coverage can be. So we thought that the story of the day was going to be maybe a couple of clips for TV and radio on Québec solidaire, making the call out for young people to go vote. And then all of a sudden a video surfaced on Facebook of a Québec solidaire candidate allegedly going to a mailbox while putting in flyers for Québec solidaire, putting in a QS flyer, but also taking out and leaving with the Parti québécois flyer that another volunteer had left. This has become sort of a big story and is actually going to be probably the story of the day for Québec solidaire. So I had to scramble to write something quickly. We're going to get Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois on this a little bit later. Right now it's about 2 or 3 o'clock. We were supposed to scrum him earlier, but he also learned about this mini controversy and he wants more time to learn more about it. So we are fingers crossed that we're going to get him later. I just recorded a rant and left an opening for a Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois clip, and hopefully we get it in time. Marie-Ève Rancourt's personal account posted a comment under the posted videos, writing that she shouldn't have done that and that she was sorry. Here's QS co-spokesperson Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois. Okay, so status update. Within 45 minutes, I basically had to turn around a script on this Québec solidaire candidate flyer fiasco. I had to record the rant. I had to come into the bus again at my desk and edit it, and now I'm just waiting for Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois to do a scrum so that I can put a clip in the spot that I've let for that. But basically, here I am using DaVinci Resolve on my laptop, but the story is pretty much there. So that's me walking it through. Then we've got the videos that I ingested of the alleged removal of the Parti québécois flyer. And we had a board made up in Montreal of the apology / statement from the candidate. So it's all there, and we're just waiting for the final piece.
1 hour later.
So it is 4:45 p.m. The TV show's at 6, and I still don't have a Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois clip on this candidate taking a PQ flyer. Hopefully we'll get that in the next 15 to 30 minutes, which would give me enough time to come back to the bus, cut a clip, and put it in my story and then send it off to the server, but we'll see what happens.
Later that same evening.
So last we spoke, I was waiting for Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois to come out and speak to the media about the situation with his candidate, Marie-Ève Rancourt. He did eventually come out and talk to us at 5:30 p.m.
Merci beaucoup. Bonne soirée.
And what he had to say was that after having a long discussion with her, she had decided to withdraw her candidacy in that riding as a result of the controversy. Which meant that the rant that I recorded was pretty much useless now. So even though I shot it, wrote it, edited it, sent it to the newsroom, we just had to scrap it. And I was live on the 6 o'clock newscast. I was live from my phone. And it looked a little something like this.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Arbeck. Thank you for joining us. A Québec solidaire candidate in Camille Laurent riding is pulling out of the race. A Facebook post accused her of removing a PQ flyer from a mailbox in the riding. Marie-Ève Rancourt is caught on video switching it out with one of hers. Rancourt was running against the PQ leader, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, in the riding, and Matt D'Amours is following all of this for us. Matt, Rancourt withdrew her candidacy in just the last hour.
Yeah, that's the information that we got from QS co-spokesperson Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois. We were hoping to hear from him hours ago. He was scheduled to speak to the media after a meeting that he had with Montreal Mayor Valérie Plante, but he pushed that back. Hello from beautiful.
So there you go. That is, it seems frantic, but honestly, that was one of the more tame days of the campaign. And I think that the main takeaway, at least for me looking back on that, is just how unpredictable a typical day for a reporter can be, because we can't set our watches to, okay, this is going to be the story of the day. My story is going to look like this. Things happen, things change, sometimes by a little bit. Sometimes your idea explodes entirely and you have to adapt very quickly and do something completely different. One of the things that I noticed looking at that video now is you can see me getting more and more tired and frantic as the day goes on, probably because I didn't eat very well. I had those dumplings and then that was pretty much it. And then the news breaks at 5:30, 5:35 that the candidate is stepping down. So the story that you pre-prepared isn't good anymore. So the only thing that you can really do is get on the show live. And the only way that I could get on the show live that day was just through a Skype call or a Zoom call like I'm doing with you right now. And that's the reality of a day like that. Let me pause that. So I'll just very quickly go through a little bit more of what it's actually like to be on the media bus. You saw it a little bit in that video, but all of the editing, all of the preparation that's being done is at these little desks that we have set up in the bus. There were about a dozen reporters at any given time at most. And we pretty much all had these tables where you're able to plug in your equipment. You're able to edit on a laptop, record stuff if you need to. And you can see there that at the front of the bus, we do have excuse me, we have a television where we're able to follow all the campaigns, which is very important because we're not just covering the candidate for the party whose bus we're on. We also have to know what's going on with the other campaigns so that we can ask questions to the candidate that we're following about what else is going on in the campaign. And that's a big part of it as well, is being plugged into everything else that's happening. And this is a scrum. I was talking about it before, but basically the reporters, will ask to have access to the candidate at a given time. The campaign will try to work around that, and we'll do a stop. Both buses will stop. There's a media bus and a candidate bus, and we'll stop somewhere. We'll set up the cameras and we'll ask some questions and try to get some new information a little bit later in the day. And then this is a colleague from another station, from 98.5 Radio, and this is how she did her radio reports, was sitting in her seat, laptop in her lap, and talking to a microphone. And you might think to yourself, well, oh, there's all this noise going on. Is that really a great environment to be recording for radio? Well, we're out on the road, so it's only natural that there's going to be the sound of people chatting around us. You'll hear the bus in the background. There's no issue with the sound or the visuals of your report reflecting the reality of what you're living right now. And we're living a campaign bus, so that's completely natural. And sometimes the campaign bus can be a little bit more satisfying. Some of the lunches that were provided to us along the way, but sometimes the lunch is not provided or the supper isn't provided. So you also have to manage your life as a reporter and making sure that you're still getting your 3 meals a day and making sure that you're not crashing at the end because you haven't been eating properly. So that's an important one as well. And then this is what the last week looked like. This was the class of 2022 on the Québec solidaire media bus. We had one camera operator there that you can see kneeling, and that person was what we call a pool reporter. So all the media outlets have an agreement that there will be one pool camera operator on each campaign bus. And what they do is they film all the news conferences, they get images of the candidates, and then those images are shared and available to all the media outlets, because it doesn't really make sense. Think about it, of every media outlet, on the English media side, it would be CTV, CBC, Global, City News. Everybody's sending a camera, so you'd have 4 or 5 camera operators all getting the same thing. So we sort of pool our resources that way and make sure that we can do things smartly. So I'll stop talking right now. That is just sort of a snapshot of the reality of being a reporter on a campaign bus. And what I'll do now is just turn it over to your questions. I hope that you have a lot of them, and I'll do my very best to answer them.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'll start the questions off, and I'm just wondering, do reporters in Canada or in Quebec are running into any of the same kinds of problems that the reporters in the United States are running into with the nastiness towards?
I was going to say that sounds like a question about toxic online culture. The short answer is yes. I don't know that it's happening to exactly the same extent, but unfortunately, yes. I can give you one example, a personal example. I was live tweeting the final candidates debate on French television. Or sorry, no, this would have been the first one. And there was a comment made by the moderator that, you know, targeted the Quebec Conservative Party leader, Éric Duhaime. And he sort of made like a little bit of a criticism of Éric Duhaime because of the controversy with his unpaid taxes. And I tweeted about that. And I tweeted it in a way that was just, look, here's a thing that was said during this debate, because it was kind of a remarkable moment in that debate. And then supporters, and I don't want to single out supporters of any one party, it happens regardless. People like their candidates. They get emotionally connected to the success of that candidate. It just so happened that night it was that. And people came after me, and they took it very personally, and they tried to connect me personally to the statement that was made by a moderator that I was just reporting on. I was just reporting on a statement that was made, but I was called all kinds of, you know, anyways, I won't repeat them here, but I was called all kinds of things. And that is a tame example. I do know personally some reporters who unfortunately are usually women who get the brunt of this stuff on social media. And not just nasty comments, but threats, which is really, really heartbreaking to see a colleague have to go through that. So it's the longer version of my answer is that yes, it is happening north of the border as well. It maybe isn't as publicized, but it does happen. And this was a weird election in terms of safety as well, because I'm sure you saw images and maybe stories about how the candidates were absolutely surrounded by security this time in a way that they had not been previously. I was covering Québec Solidaire and looking at Gabriel Nadeau-Dubois walking around at campaign events. It almost looked like he was the president of the United States being guarded by the Secret Service. And that wasn't for nothing. There was reporting going around, and it was confirmed that the candidates were getting an unbelievable volume of threats compared to previous elections. So it is a phenomenon that is affecting people in media, the people that they cover, and it's concerning. It's very worrying.
Thank you. We have a question from Susan Buscemi. Go ahead, Susan.
Unmute. Okay. Hi, Matt. Thank you for joining us. This is very, very interesting. Might put you on a spot a little bit. Do you ever see things during the campaigns when you're on the buses in a candidate that perhaps indicate a lack of integrity or a pettiness or volatility, things that you can't necessarily report on, that you have to stay mum about, that might be frustrating?
Sure. Reporters are people. This is something that we talk about a lot in journalism school. It's one of these like perennial evergreen topics of what is objectivity. You know, we try to lay out what the definition is, but not only what it is in an abstract sense, but how do you practice objectivity? And a sort of condensed version of that sort of classroom discussion is that objectivity usually means that you try to approach a situation with a dispassionate eye as much as possible, regardless of what your personal feelings might be about an issue. A candidate or a politician might make a statement that you find problematic at best, or a policy that you think doesn't make a lot of sense, but your role as a reporter isn't necessarily to comment on the virtue of a statement or the viability of a policy, it's to let people know what is being said and what is being proposed, to give them as much context about that as possible, and to let people make up their own minds. Now, that doesn't mean that we're just stenographers. We're not just going out there and getting information and saying, okay, here's the information. There's more to it than that. We talk to experts. You know, I showed you a little bit about my story about the Quebec Solidaire transit plan. That wasn't just reporting on what they're saying. It was also talking to experts in the field of public works management and public transit about, you know, do they think that this makes sense? So regardless of what the candidate is or the policy is, I or another reporter in the back of their head might be thinking, that doesn't make any sense, or I don't think that that's going to work, or they'll say or do something that you say to yourself like, boy, I am really unimpressed with the way this person is acting or speaking. But you try not to let that get in the way of the primary mission of reporting, which is let people know what's going on, talk to the smartest people that you can find to give you context about that story. And that's if you can walk away from a story saying, I have done my job, and the people watching or listening to a story are now more informed, then you've done your job.
I have a question.
Hang on. Okay, David, go ahead.
I understand that you're not obliged to reveal your source. What law protects you?
That's a tricky question, because there are different rules about revealing sources. For the most part, it's not a legal mechanism. It's very much the policy of most mainstream media outlets, is that if we make a decision to protect somebody's identity, we stick to that. Because for the most part, when we speak to people, the first thing that we want to do is to be able to show them on camera or to have their voices heard and attach a name to that face or a name to that voice. And the reason we do that is out of transparency. Ideally, you want people, your audience, to know who it is you're talking to, why they're talking to you, what their agenda might be. And that's an important part of storytelling. Now, there are obviously situations where somebody will request either anonymity, or can you just use my first name, or can I talk to you but you don't show my face on camera? And there's all kinds of reasons for that. I'll give you one example. A couple of years ago, I spoke to an asylum seeker from Saudi Arabia who was in detention in Laval, awaiting his trial for his asylum claim. And he had requested that we don't show his face, that we don't play audio of his voice, and that we use a pseudonym. And the reason for that is that this person was I guess you can call him a political dissident. He's somebody who did not agree with the regime in Saudi Arabia, and he still had family there, and he feared reprisals against his loved ones for speaking out against the regime in Saudi Arabia and talking to us. So that's a situation where and it's not just willy-nilly. It's not just somebody asks for anonymity or a pseudonym and we grant it. There is a conversation that is had with editorial leadership at a news organization. Right now, I'm speaking for CBC. I can't speak to the process at other media outlets, but I'm sure it's very similar. You bring it to your boss brings it to their boss and says, is this something we can do? Is it something we should do? And then we go with it. That's policy internally. Now, when it comes to legal protections, that's where it gets a little bit more complicated. There are whistleblower laws. There are laws that protect a reporter's right to not reveal sources, but sometimes that has to go to court. That is not a given, and there have been high-profile examples in the past of Canadian reporters refusing to reveal their sources to law enforcement or to government departments, and them getting into some hot water and having to reaffirm and defend that right to do so. So I guess the ultimate point I'm trying to make is that it's very complicated. It is not a one-size-fits-all process for protecting people's identity, and it's something that has to be fought for. It's not a given, and it's something that reporters have to protect in the courts, in the newsrooms, everywhere, basically.
Sam Watts, you're up.
Yeah, I thought of a question to ask you, Matt. You've probably interviewed me at least a dozen times, and I'm just curious. I like to see the stories that you do with me as relatively straightforward. But I remember one time you had just come from interviewing a family that had just experienced the murder of their son in Point Claire. And as I recall, you were probably the only reporter who got a face-to-face with that family. I'm just wondering if you could tell us of any stories like that one, or situations as a reporter that you've had to deal with that were both tricky to manage, emotionally compelling, and at the same time, there was a deep need for respect of the overall dynamic of the situation, because I'm sure that it would be interesting for us.
I remember that example that you're bringing up very, very well. I think that was last year that happened. This was a teenager in the West Island who there was a fight outside of a school. One thing led to another. It escalated. This young man was stabbed and died from his injuries in hospital a couple of days later. I had been covering the story the day before his death because I was in youth court following what was happening with the suspect. And then we got word later that day that the young man had died. So the next day we did want to follow up on this story because we thought that it was not only important because this was a young person, another young person who died as a result of violence in the street, but there had been quite a bit of this going around, young people, stabbings and gun violence, and it was part of a very unfortunate continuum of stories. And this one I remember because it's tough because I mentioned earlier, sometimes you are doing stories with people on the absolute worst days of their lives. And this was one of those stories. It was probably, I would say, maybe the day after the worst day of this family's life. And what I did was I wanted to reach out to the family. But you have to realize that in reaching out to the family, you are, by definition, you are bothering them. You are intruding. You are introducing yourself into a moment where they pretty much don't want to deal with anything but their grief. But what happened in this situation is I found a friend of the young man who was able to get me a phone number for the mother. And I called her. I introduced myself, and we ended up having a conversation on the phone for about 10 minutes, just talking about how the family's doing, what's going on. And at the end of the phone call, I asked whether she would be willing to speak with me, for a report that I was doing. And you have to be very careful in those situations because there's no getting away from the fact that you as a reporter want something from this person. You do want them to say yes. And people might say, well, it's callous, it's selfish. But what you have to remember is that the reason that I want this person to say yes is so that I can help them tell the story of this person that they've lost. And what I've realized is that it can actually be a very important thing for families of victims of violence or other tragedies, is to have that avenue to be able to talk to their city, to their community. And that's sort of the conversation we had was, tell me about your son. What kind of person was he like? What happened that day? And I think with time, you develop a kind of sensitivity in knowing how to approach people in those situations, and they can recognize that. And I think that in this case, that's what happened. And my goodness, this woman invited me into her home and showed me her son's room and showed me pictures and hockey jerseys and all this, So yes, there are days where it's very difficult. It's a difficult needle to thread in terms of getting people to say yes to interviews, difficult to get them to say yes to share in their grief and these horrible situations. But it can be hard on the reporter as well. There's no denying that You know, we're not these blank slates that just go into the world and get information and then give it to the audience, and that's that. No, you feel rough at the end of the day on those ones. And that the same goes for stories, let's say, during the pandemic. I did quite a few, unfortunately, really tough stories about seniors in long-term care who died after outbreaks, and speaking to their family and actually having spoken to the seniors themselves hours before they died. And those can be extremely difficult days as well. So it is a complex issue, both in the way that you treat others, but also the way that you have to remember to treat yourself well afterwards.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? In that case, Matt, thank you ever so much. The idea of going on a bus and spending your life there for 2 weeks is not my idea of good traveling, but there you go. What can I say? But it sounds like it's a very interesting job, and as you say, it can be emotional and difficult at times also. But you get to see a lot of people, meet a lot of people, and do a lot of different things. I thank you very much for spending your time with us today. Very much appreciated. And we're going to continue our meeting. And you're welcome to stay with us, or good time to go off for lunch. So I'd leave that up to you.
I do actually have to leave, but thank you very much for having me and being able to talk about this. And thank you very much for your questions. They were great, and I hope that I gave you some insight into this crazy world that we inhabit, the reporters.
Our pleasure.